President Biden and fellow Democrats are celebrating the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. Of course, there has been a lot of speculation as to whether it will bring down inflation that we're seeing. Young Voices contributor Kenneth Schrupp's up late with me tonight here on the Final Five to break it down. Welcome to the show. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
We know we've had guests on this show who have supported this passage of the bill, whether you want to call it reconciliation, call it the Inflation Reduction Act. And the question I had was, well, what if it doesn't? Now, clearly, you can't wave a magic wand and stop inflation, but when you look at what the new numbers came out this week, it's certainly not moving in the direction I think a lot of people are hoping it would.
Right. I mean, the Penn Wharton Budget Office did an independent assessment of the Inflation Reduction Act and found that it either have potentially a short-term increase or no overall effect on inflation, and that's exactly what we've seen. Inflation is not under control. This long-term supply chain problems causing inflation are going to remain for a very long time to come.
You know, it comes down to what's in a name, and every bill that's ever passed in Washington, especially over the last couple of years, seems to have some sort of catchy name, some sort of catchy buzzword out there, because this talks about things that have been discussed, that have been priorities for Democrats, whether it be ways to mitigate climate change, whether it be addressing pharmaceutical prices. None of these really check the boxes of bringing down the cost of consumer goods, which we see continue to spike.
Exactly, and my latest piece actually addresses how the Inflation Reduction Act, which tries to, quote unquote, bring pharmaceutical prices under control, actually is going to make your drugs significantly more expensive. There's three ways that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to make drugs more expensive. First of all, they're trying to institute price caps and price controls for drugs. 7 to 11 years after a drug has been on the market, Medicare will be able to say, this is the price we're going to pay for your drug. You have 2 years to accept our demands. If you don't, we're going to tax you at 65 to 95% of your profit on that drug, or your income from that drug, sorry. And once that happens, you know that these pharmaceutical companies are going to push prices up as high as they can for those 7 to 11 years that they have the drug on the market. The Inflation Reduction Act includes these caps on how much you can increase your prices by to inflation. For the last 2 years, inflation was at 14.5%. Drug prices only went up by 2.5% in the last 2 years. So you can expect way higher drug price increases than we've already experienced as a result of price caps and price controls. Now, let's just add the third item to the mix. The Inflation Reduction Act puts in maximum out-of-pocket spending limits for Medicare and Medicaid. Well, this sounds great for people who actually are paying in the program. What this really does is push all the costs onto the American taxpayer. People are going to take even more drugs than before. The average person on Medicare is taking 5 drugs if they're your senior, or up to 7 if they're actually in a retirement home. And this is just untenable, where we're spending $33,000 a year on their drugs.
When we're looking right now, though, at the cost of prescription drugs, which is something that has come up every couple election cycles, and we know there's always some sort of push, whether it be Part B or whatever they can do to bring down the price of drugs, you can't deny that in the United States right now, people who rely on certain prescriptions are paying demonstrably more here than you would if you lived in Canada or the UK. And I get it. There's a lot about innovation. There's a lot about making sure that the drug companies can continue to do. Look, they did amazing things with Operation Warp Speed. You cannot deny that they were able to get that vaccine through a public-private partnership to get where we were and get where we are right now. But is there is there a happy medium here when it comes to this issue?
Honestly, the way that other companies have succeeded is either being more capitalist or more socialist. What we have is the worst of both worlds. We have the lethargy and bureaucracy of a socialist system with the greed and worse prices that we pay in a all unregulated sort of capitalist system. It's the worst into one. We should really try to look either more like Singapore or somewhere more like Europe, where you have a single payer system that can actually negotiate for the cost of drugs.
So as we see all of this play out right now, we're gonna watch, obviously, because again, we go back to the idea that you can't wave a magic wand and see inflation go down. But there was that dichotomy that we saw the other day where and we mentioned this the other night on the show, where you had President Biden and Democrats celebrating at the White House. And let's be honest, politicians celebrate when they pass something. That was set up against the backdrop of the fact that we had this massive drop in the stock market, and that inflation report came out. So unless you have some sort of way to go to voters, go to Americans and say this is where it's working, there's a long way to go to sell people on this bill who may be on the fence.
Look, energy prices are going to keep going up. You know, we are due for a world economic slowdown, and that will reduce some energy demand. But we're taking so much supply offline that we're going to see energy shortages for some time to come.
We know too. When you look at the prices of everything out there right now, gas has dropped, but there seem to be some analysts out there who believe it's going to go up, and it always does go up in some way, shape, or form. It's all cyclical, but regardless, we're going to watch how this all plays out. Kenneth Schrupp from Young Voices, good to see you tonight. Thanks for joining us here on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. You have a wonderful evening.
And the Final Five is back right after this.